managers, led by HR Chair or HR Director Gary McLean. And today we will be looking at Chapter 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, County Commissioners. Part of the ongoing saga, Chapter 5, I would like to point out, we made a change in Section 2 under discipline. This was back in November of, Chapter 2, Section G. This was some language that was eliminated back in November of 2021. This section almost exclusively has to do with employee conduct, primarily prohibited conduct as well as discipline. The Section 2 that I referred to earlier was under the disciplinary section. We'd sent this out to all the department heads and elected officials. Didn't receive any feedback. I didn't know if any of you had received any. There aren't a lot of areas in here that I see needs for correction, but I'm open to things from the board. One of the things I did want to discuss in trying to get your some feedback on is one of the prohibited areas, as you know, was smoking. And over the past, I'd say 5 years or 6 years, there's a prevalence of a lot of, let's just call them smoking alternatives or cigarette alternatives. There's vaping and e-cigarettes and probably some things I'm not even aware of yet. So I have kind of mixed feelings whether including those in here is beneficial. I see places that have. My only concern is that it's such an evolving area. Are we better just to leave it with smoking regardless of what form it is, and maybe just mention that it includes e-cigarettes and other forms? That's one area that that's kind of just continues to emerge. I mean, there's things out that especially those of you that are in the school industry will know it's like a industry unto itself right now. The other one that I know is important that we want to talk about, and again, I need some feedback on this, is the unauthorized possession of firearms or other weapons on county property. We've never taken any strong position relative to that. Most of these are common conduct issues like stealing county property, using threatening language. But those are a couple areas where I know there may be some differences of opinion. Just to be clear, we don't allow smoking in the vehicles. That's always somewhat of a challenge with road and bridge and other areas where individuals are assigned a vehicle, but we do not. I think Marty's put stickers in most, if not all of those. Some of the issues in here, like engaging in horseplay and pranks, have to do with workers' comp, minimizing risks under workers' comp, where you get injuries where people are screwing around and result in an injury at work. This is one way we can defeat those claims because there's a specific prohibition about that. Unauthorized overtime obviously is an important one. You get employees who decide to just want to manipulate the overtime for their benefit, that it does need to be authorized. We'll move on through 6 and 7, but I'm happy to come back as if the board thinks about a couple of those. We can discuss them now, or we can discuss them at subsequent times. But those are a couple areas in here that I think are important sort of policy positions relative to the board, really. You've got the policy that's in here. On the discipline section, which is Section 2. This has been kind of a difficult section to address because we have employees that are both for cause and at will. And so just so that we can get on the same page, employees that are at will can be terminated with or without notice and with or without cause for any reason not protected by law, under the idea that an employee can quit, and if they can quit, we can terminate. So we have some employees that are at will. We also have employees that are for cause, some by statute. For example, the sheriff's deputies can only be terminated pursuant to a hearing by state law. So they're for cause, and there's a prescription there. And then the policy manual itself for county employees generally creates for cause employment. So the way previous boards have taken that, if the elected official wishes to have at will or for cause employment, then that communication to the employee has to specifically express that. So in those cases where an employee is at will, their offer letter will say they're at will, and that these provisions of the policy do not apply where they're for cause, and it indicates as such.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On elected officials, are their employees, county employees, are they appointed, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it depends on your perspectives, but I'll try to answer that the best I can. So from the standpoint of the EOC, from the standpoint of workers' comp, from the standpoint of federal reporting agencies, they're all employees of the county. From the standpoint of state statute, they're appointed, which means that the elected official gets to pick who works for them. And so their powers, John is appointed by Danny, for example, and John's appointment technically ends when Danny's term ends. And unless he's appointed by someone else, then he would no longer be appointed in that office. So in those cases where they are appointed by an elected official, their offer letter says something like, you're being appointed pursuant to the authority of the county attorney, in this particular case, to the position of, and so we try to be as clear as we can about making that distinction. I think Doc alluded to this earlier today. There was a point with the county commissioners when he first started, where the statute for the county commissioners did not exist for appointing staff. And it was crazy to think of all the areas of responsibility that the county commission had. And so sometime maybe, I don't know, 2011 or so, they amended that statute that gave the board authority to appoint staff as needed to carry out the duties of the board expressly. Prior to that, counties had done it, but it had not been expressly provided to the county commission. It does now expressly provide for that. Did that answer your question, Mary?
Yeah.
Okay.
But, I guess one other, how does that affect if there would be repercussions and they'd sue the county?
Yeah, so that, as you know, and we've had a number of these, the county is still an entity. We're insured under one policy. Whether they're suing me or you or John or Danny or whomever, it's still the county, and the county will be named. And typically they would be named also in their official capacity. So we don't have separate policies. That's why I said it kind of depends how you look at it. But overall, we're still one organization. The elected officials have the ability to appoint staff and manage the operations. The Board of County Commissioners have authority to manage the business affairs of the county. In all cases were not otherwise provided by law. You also have authority with respect to the budget, and as an extension of the budget, compensation. So you have the ability to make rules within the county buildings, use of county buildings, many of those types of things. But operationally, that falls within the respective elected officials, falls under their authority with respect to operations. So that's kind of a good point, in that, let's say John wasn't doing his job and you were dissatisfied with John, you would need to work through Danny. The board would not have an ability to directly discipline John. Would have to work through Danny to effectuate disciplinary action, which is not that odd. I mean, you would want to do that even though you could do it directly in other areas of the county that report directly to the board. Common sense would say it would make sense to involve their supervisor in those concerns and get them on board with doing that. So I don't know if it's a huge issue. The biggest challenge is having at will and for cause employees in the same organization, and that is somewhat challenging.
Any other questions or directed or asked for Gary?
Yes. If I may. Unauthorized use of firearms is different than, they had this discussion in August at the events complex. They could no longer put up signs and say you cannot enter with a firearm because state law says they can carry firearms.
Yeah.
But this is just saying you can't have unauthorized use, like firing off guns and stuff, but it doesn't prohibit them from carrying, right?
Yeah, so one of the things that's been difficult here has been particularly challenging is that we have to balance this notion of public, that it's a public building, and obviously you can carry firearms under Wyoming law, a public building, but we've also had the issue that the county, like the courthouse, for example, hosts the courtrooms
Right.
and courtroom security. And at different times in our history, like we had the security was at the main entrance to the door prior to the remodel and some of those things. So I'm just saying that each building has a somewhat of a different issue depending on what it's used for.
Yeah.
And so those are a couple policies that may require some work. I think more I think at this point is think about that and provide some direction. If we want to revisit those, I'm happy to do that. Times change. I think that's the purpose of this exercise. And we want to make sure that they're reflective of the time that we're in.
And we've done some things when it comes to firearms. You know, we've done a resolution as a sanctuary county
Yeah.
for weapons and firearms and that type of thing. And since then, we've known that even the Supreme Court has come out and said that kids under the age of 18 have a right to carry guns. Now, we also know by state law, which trumps probably what we do here, you're not allowed to carry a firearm in the courtrooms, law enforcement office, or jail,
Yeah.
detention centers, bars, supposedly, but yet that's where they're
Yeah.
used the most.
Yeah.
And then
Just a wild west.
one other one, courtrooms, bars,
Is that in the state?
schools,
Yeah.
schools.
Is that in state law, Doc? Is that in state law about the exclusions?
Of firearms?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's pretty well understood, because when you take your concealed weapons permit, the sheriff will look at you and say, we expect you to follow the laws of the state. And they only prohibit the carrying of weapons in courtroom, a bar, schools, and in jails and law enforcement facilities. So realistically, you take this building based on state law, they can carry it any place in this building except up in the courtroom, once you get into those areas there. So and then we as commissioners, we've done our work to protect the Second Amendment and done a lot about it, but yet we have this rule here. It's almost hypocritical. So, I mean, but again, too, don't get me wrong, I get it, because I hear it all the time of even within our dark red area of the state, by God, gun rights. I heard a senator say, I'm going to show up wearing my gun because I have my right. And he was told, if you do, we're going to arrest you. And he's going to show up. Well, the area he was going to show up wearing it, all they did was say, hey, we don't want any guns allowed. But yet by state statute, it wasn't supported it. So, I don't want to get into those things. We either align ourselves as we are, the way we talk, which is a sanctuary. And then there's always that but. And after but, you better listen. And that is courts, or whatever else is
Yeah.
there. But I would really like to see us come in line with there. I think what's more important on the smoking piece to consider is rather than no smoking, find a way that we incentivize people to quit smoking. And I know, Gary, you've tried a lot of things, you
Yeah.
talked about a lot of things,
Yeah.
but I still think comes a point in time when that'll catch. But right now, if you take a look at what we have, as much as I don't look for it, but I'll guarantee you that people are, when I was reading it over the weekend, I kind of laughed. Because I'll guarantee you, there are people smoking within windows, within doorways, and not within, but within that 25 feet.
Yeah.
We've got violation, but you know what? We just kind of go on. So either get rid of it or enforce it or incentivize it. You know, it's just, that's how I look at it.
One of the things that with respect to the entrances, I think, and as you know, when the weather's good, it's a little easier to go a little further. When it's colder, nobody.
Yeah.
But is in this building in particular, and it's different by facility, but this building in particular, if you notice, there are air intakes by most of the entrances. So you end up, especially on cold days, in pulling smoke as well as car exhaust and other things into the air intakes of the building. Other buildings are designed differently, and that's less of a problem.
And I don't think you want designated smoking areas because,
That would be encouraging, isn't it?
well, no, but there's a mistake there. When you have designated smoking areas, you're entitling smokers. I had this happen to me over the weekend, right, wrong, or indifferent. Motel I was staying at, I decided to go, nice weather. I thought, well, I'll just go sit outside for a little bit and some fresh air. It wasn't hot. It was comfortable. So I went and sat on the bench, and I knew that's where people smoke, but I thought, you know what? That's where the bench was. There wasn't a bench for anybody else,
Yeah.
anywhere else. And here come the smokers. They come out and they stop and they looked at me like, what the hell are you doing here?
Yeah.
So they lit up. They actually, 4 of them stood around me. I mean, it was like north, south, east, west, and lit up. And of course, I don't mind it, but I do mind it. But basically what happened is I said, okay, you can have the bench. I'm done. Get up and walk away. You know, I just really think a smoking area is an entitlement.
Yeah.
So I like to see, you know, if we can, I don't know what, Gary, but let's be realistic. Let's, you know, look at those. Those are only 2 of them. Probably anybody else could pick out some others, but doggone it. Decide what we're about, and then let's go along those lines and let's not have battles.
Yeah.
Why create problems for ourselves?
Yeah. One of the things I think that maybe with respect to the firearm issue is because of the redesign of the buildings and the new buildings in different areas, maybe it needs to be something along unauthorized possession of firearms in identified restricted areas or something like that. Because there are areas. So for example, obviously the custodians clean in the court areas. Or you might have people that come in from the public to certain areas that would be legal to do it, but not legal in other areas. So
Well, I
maybe
think-
something along.
Well, I think the word unauthorized use.
Yeah,
That's not saying they can't carry it. It just said they can't go in there shooting the
Sure.
gun off.
sure.
Then we got signs outside the building that says no weapons allowed inside the building.
But that's not legal, that.
Yeah.
part.
Well, those ones
Anyhow.
are holdovers from the magnetometer
they're-
being down there, and that's where.
And this one here, I had to laugh. This one here, this one, I think we got out of our handbook from kindergarten. Fighting with or otherwise attempting to injure or injuring a coworker, supervisor, an elected official, or a member of the visiting public. You know, there's already a law in the books for that.
But
If
he's had
somebody
it-
does that, you file
Yeah, well,
charges against them.
Yeah,
But they've already had examples of that this year in the courthouse.
Sure they have, but you know what? If they violated the law, they get arrested. I mean, I can see why that was put in there, but you know,
Well, I
is
think
it
it's
really
okay.
needed? I don't know,
I think it's all right to have it though,
you know.
because you know how some people are gonna say, you didn't say we couldn't fight.
Well, look, you know what? I know how to defend myself, but at the same token, other people, there's still the courts are on, there's still law on their side. Still
So
law.
in those couple areas, I'll maybe make a stab at some language on the smoking and the firearm stuff and see if we can refine that a little bit for the next policy review. And if any of you have any thoughts in terms of even just articulating generally your sentiments, I'll try to get that into some concise language.
Otherwise, they're pretty well, I'm not, we go
Yeah.
all the way through it. It's pretty
Yeah.
good. We worked on part of this policy
Yeah.
when we did the
Mhm.
other stuff, and I thought we cleaned it up pretty good. So, but I'm
No, I
glad to see
think
it come back.
Yeah, I think it's pretty comprehensive on the cigarettes. I'd say just to include e-cigarettes and other forms and unauthorized use of firearms. I mean, we beat these poor things to death, and you too. I mean, making you
Yes.
redo them.
Well,
So
there's a couple things that I think are where we get a little bit confused, and we've been working through these even with the county assessor most recently, is there are some operational policies that have to do with how we do our jobs in a particular department or a particular area. So sometimes like our goal is to say that our like appearance and clothing or will be safety, it'll meet the OSHA standards, it'll be presentable. But it's really up to the department that's managing those to say, hey, for this work environment, you need steel-toed boots. And this one, you just need high leather shoes. And we're just trying to get this sort of overall policy that it'll comply with the safety standards for that nature of work. So for example, in the assessor's office, I wrote an operational policy for their department last year, Roy.
Yeah.
About a year
Yeah,
ago.
about a year ago.
Whole set of policies for them governing just operational issues and keying it in. Doing the same with road and bridge now to incorporate some safety stuff and some other things. And so I think that's where the two kind of dovetail together. And it's hard sometimes to say, where are they operational, meaning they affect the operations of a particular department, and what are the interests of the county on a broad scale as a component of the business interests of the county. A couple things that I'll just point out, and then I think we can wrap up. One is that the current policy with respect to outside employment is that it may be permitted, but your job with the county is primary, and any outside employment has to be approved by the supervisor. So part of the reason for that is we have a lot of jobs that provide oversight in the community. For example, when we had the county surveyor had to review all surveying disputes in the county. Sometimes the county public works director or the county engineer will have roles with respect to those types of things. And so we want to make certain we don't end up in a conflict of interest circumstance, or we end up in a circumstance where somebody is using county equipment or materials to further their private employment interests, or that their time and energies are being consumed by their outside employment. And so that's one way that that is addressed. There's also in section 6 where we address participation in community affairs. Certainly past boards have been supportive of employees trying to participate in clubs and organizations, and I think that's important. And I think we've seen very good participation from county employees on those things. And again, we just want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with the ability to do their job. So I just wanted to point those out. Yeah, in this particular section, those were the areas that jumped out at me. If there's anything else that you'd like me to address in here, I'll address those when we go through chapter 6 and bring those back for approval at that time right there.
Gary, I'd just like to jump on and agree with most of my cohorts up here. The one thing I saw that I wondered if we should address, and maybe it's in there because there's a lot
Yeah.
in there. Like Doc said,
Yeah.
it's pretty thorough in the list. Is something that I saw when I was running business was the advent of social media. And maybe there needs to be a clause about employees and comments regarding county business on social media. And I know sometimes
That's a good one.
we put things in place because of someone making an error, and that always stinks, but sometimes that's why things have to start. But I wondered if putting a clause in there about social media contact, about county issues and county concerns should be prohibited, just because it is such a concept out there now. And it's not something when we even look, 5-6 years ago, when we redid the policies at that point, it wasn't even something you would think about.
Yeah.
But now it's actually a pressing need. I when I ran NowCap, I used to always be proud because I never had any employee ugliness. But if you went to our Casper NowCap site, it was probably once a week you'd see on a Ratner Raid page or an employer page. So it might be something to consider putting in there, just as a thought from my perspective.
One of the areas, where this obviously is super important is in the detention facility and in law enforcement. And, we had to work at getting some policies in the sheriff's group and in addressing those things, because they have access to a lot of information that's probably not general. It's part of an investigation, part of an ongoing review, privacy and other things. And so, while we've addressed it in certain specific spots, I hear what you're saying. We maybe get some overall guidance from the county perspective. And of course, those more specific policies can dovetail into that.
Well, I saw something in here with regard to, rather than focus on the fact of social media and that, just, basically they're going to end up using county equipment at
Network,
their
right.
desk.
Exactly.
Yes, to do things, even with their phone. Some of them will attempt, but that's gosh darn. But that, what? I agree, we need something there, but at the same token, you cannot tell me. It's hard for me to believe as a supervisor that you cannot tell when somebody's doing that type of work on county stuff. It's not hard to recognize. I could recognize it with 150 teachers. So I just can't believe that. And you know what? That's just blatantly wrong. That just tells me people, it's just blatantly wrong. That's all I'm going to say about it. That is terrible. It might be in here on the.
We have some general references,
30,
but I think
yeah.
we need to see if we can tighten that up a little bit. Obviously, we have policies that specifically prohibit the use of county equipment or time for
There you go.
non-work purposes.
Right.
Yeah, there
We
you go.
obviously have restrictions on the use of county equipment, which would include the network. What's made this really difficult is that obviously I can shut my network off on my phone and access cell networks, and unless you have direct supervision for everybody, they can do that. And it's easy for people to send out pictures. You've all probably seen cases where they've sent out pictures of inmates from jails or other things that were inappropriate. And we've, I think, dealt with some of those issues, but I think we can strengthen the equipment and the time. And then,
And I think there needs to be a clause in there that serves notice that at any point in time, with or without their knowledge, IT can monitor their machines.
Exactly.
I remember when I was principal, I requested that, and within a semester, I had 2 3-inch notebooks to take to the teacher and talk to the teacher about. And I mean, we tracked 8 periods a day, and all 8 periods, solitaire, shopping. Good thing we had kids that were self-motivated on the high end of the scale of learning, because they were self-teaching. They'd love to have a percent of that daily paycheck, I'm
Yeah.
telling you. But my point being is, about the time I was ready to take and deal with it, I got a letter of resignation, so that saved a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's no expectation to privacy
No.
using our network,
But
and
that's
that might not be in this section, but that's something just to make
It
sure
might
it's
be
tied together. Yeah.
tied
I'll take
together
a look at
somewhere
it.
along the
Yeah.
line, and then the big key part, when we get all finished, we need to make sure we serve notice with the entire policy manual.
Yeah.
And do it in a systematic way to where nobody can say, I don't know. And then anybody newly that's hired, make them sign off. They received a
Yeah.
employee manual. You know?
Well, Ashley does a good job with that part, so.
Well, good.
She does a good
Well, I'll
job
tell you
with that,
what, you've got very, very strong people in your department.
So she does a good job of
That's
that.
why you're swimming instead of sinking.
Yeah. Gary, question
Yeah.
on that. So all employees sign off on the employee manual?
So no, not everybody, because
Only
it doesn't
because
apply to
that-
everybody.
Because,
but
right, because
That's
if we
right.
were to do that, we'd also lose that will status
Oh,
because it could
that's
become an
correct.
implied contract under the Wackenhut stuff.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I was
Yep.
double checking. Okay,
Yeah, and you also have employees, for example, like summer hires. They're going to be at will by their very nature, so they're not going to get copies. If the department heads need to explain to them some procedure, that'll be their responsibility as part of their orientation. But yeah, so there are some exceptions.
Otherwise, I think it's a good section.
So anyway, take a look at that. But this doesn't have to be our final, especially on those couple areas. We're going to talk about 6 next time, and I'll circle back on 5. So if you have anything, shoot me an email. I'll try to maybe take a little closer look at those couple areas and see if we can come up with some clarifying language on those and get them to you before we do 6, so we can kind of move on with this and go from there. Are there any other areas right now that are of particular concern that either look for? Okay,
No, just keep
The
moving
plan
on.
is though to get through them all, then adopt the whole thing as a whole, because I know
That's correct.
we give you mixed
Yep.
yeah.
messages. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's kind of important. I mean, I don't care if in a month we have to come back to here because we've thought of something, but we're pretty well identified. We can move on to the next one. And
Yeah.
It should be a living
Yeah.
document. You should
Yeah.
be
yeah,
visiting it
absolutely.
regularly.
So,
Great.
all right. Any other questions for Mr. McLean?
Good job. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. That was very thorough. I do appreciate it. So
Mhm.
with that being said, any other comments regarding chapter 5 discussion from the other commissioners? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So
So
move.
move. Oh,
Got a motion? Got a second?
Marion Doc.
What's that?
Doc said
Oh, Doc second. Okay. All right. All in favor with an aye?
aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign.
Hallelujah.
We're good to go. Thank you, guys. We're adjourning from our 3rd meeting of the
Thanks,
day.
Gary.
Thank you. Gary.